When your room is a mess and you can't find your memory card to your nice camera, so you have to use your iPhone, and your hair is just gone completely bonkers. I cut all my hair off, y'all. We'll just do that for this video. Hi guys, my name is Emma Tobias, and today I'm gonna talk about the books I read this summer, and I don't know where to look on this camera, so this is gonna be really fun. I read quite a few books this summer that I haven't talked about, and books that I really enjoyed for the most part, so let's get into it, guys. The first book I want to talk about is a book that a lot of people read, and that is Always and Forever, Lara Jean by Jenny Han. This is the third book into All the Boys I Loved Before series, which is a YA contemporary series about a half-Korean girl named Lara Jean. She's 16 at the start of the series, sweet 16. She has two sisters, a single dad, and she's just having all the boy problems, but also all the inner growing up teenage problems. I really enjoyed this series quite a lot. It's sweet, it's adorable, it's charming. I think everyone swooned in their own way about Peter Kay and Lara Jean's sometimes unrealistic but at times also incredibly sweet relationship. But what I loved about this series, what made this series so special to me, was the depiction of sisterhood and friendship. I thought that was just so well done and really well crafted. It reminded me a lot of like Pride and Prejudice and Sensibility and the way that Jenny Han crafts this sister relationship between Lara Jean and her older and younger sister. I really loved it, and I cannot wait for the movie adaptation, which I think is just going to be adorable and lighthearted and what we need in the world right now. So, quite enjoyed. I'm sorry, I still don't know where to look, so just focus on my words like this is a podcast. Alright, next I read Sweet Bitter by Stephanie Danler. This is a contemporary realistic fiction, literary fiction novel set in New York City in the mid-2000s about a woman who moves to New York City at the age of like 22-ish. And she moves to New York City, doesn't know what she wants to do, so she gets a job at a restaurant, a high-end, very expensive, very fancy restaurant, as a back waiter, meaning that she works between the kitchen and the dining room. This book is really interesting in a lot of ways. The writing style is beautiful. It gives a really fun, interesting look about like high-end dining that someone like me who is not well cultured in the world of dining would never really get otherwise unless I watch a lot of Top Chef, which I do. But the descriptions in this book are beautiful, and the character development is definitely very interesting. You have a lot of these characters who really fall into like literary fiction tropes. They're characters to me that don't really feel fully realized at times, the main character especially. She's just going through this like very classic literary fiction development of a young woman who's like learning that the world is grittier and better and worse and greater and whatever than she thought before. That wasn't the part of this book that I liked, because I thought that you could replace these characters with any characters in a literary fiction novel set in New York City and it would probably work. What I liked about this book was the writing style, was the use of description and imagery to create this beautiful world of food and this gritty world of food. So yeah, I did enjoy it though, and it's got a nice, like, pleasing cover. Next, I read Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. This took me a really long time to read because I wanted to savor it. If you don't know what this book is about, which I'm sure you do at this point, it's about Roxane Gay's thoughts. It's a series of essays about culture and life and Roxane Gay's life and her views on culture in terms of race and gender and sexuality. It's intersectional in its feminism, but it's also kind in its feminism, meaning it quite honestly means that you can be a bad feminist and still be a feminist, quote-unquote bad feminist. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed it because I enjoy Roxane Gay's writing style. I enjoyed it because it allowed me to read a different perspective than the perspectives that we normally hear about culture, a perspective of a black woman in academia, a woman who has a different lived experience than mine, an experience that I value greatly and I enjoyed reading and learning from. And yeah, it was really great and fascinating and eye-opening, and everyone should read Bad Feminist. Next, we have Shrill by Lindy West. Kind of a similar idea. It is a collection of essays by Lindy West, and this collection of essays focuses on pop culture, much like Bad Feminist, but also focuses on Lindy West's personal life, much like Bad Feminist. This book's perspective specifically is about Lindy West being a fat woman and what that looks like in her own life, what it looks like when she's looking at pop culture, what it looks like and everywhere in between. She talks about other things in this book, but the focus of many of the collections is about being a fat woman in American culture. This book made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me feel so many things that I can't even tell you. I haven't heard BookTube talk about Shrill enough. I think these two books really go very well together aesthetically, but also in terms of the writing and what's inside of these books. I really deeply loved this book as much as I loved Bad Feminist, and I think everyone should read Shrill. Next, we're going to move on to The Cheese Monkeys, a novel in 2 semesters by Chip Kidd. This is an experimental sort of literary fiction novel written in the early 2000s about a fictional art school set in the 1950s, and about a young man who has starting his first year at art school, specifically interested in the world of commercial design or graphic design. This book is really great in many ways. It's funny and weird and kitschy in that 1950s way that I really enjoy, but it's also pretty bizarre and confusing. There is a twist, kind of, not really a twist, but something that happens in this book that confused me, and kind of made me go, what? There is queer representation, at least there's a hint of queer representation in this book. What I loved most about this book was, quite honestly, besides the fact it's really bizarre and I didn't really know what was happening towards the last third of the book, what I really loved this book was the depiction and descriptions of art school and being an art student, which is something that I used to be back in the day, like 3.5 years ago, and I just absolutely loved that part of this book, because I was like, I relate so hard to what they're doing. They're staying up all night making things and they're losing their minds a little bit. Yeah, this book isn't for everyone. It's something that if you like experimental novels, if you like books that are a little weird and quirky, this will be up your alley. Otherwise, if you're not so into that, I would not give this book a read. Or if you're an art student, I think this is a good read. Next we have The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. Oh man. Okay, so I read this during Booktubeathon and I was really unsure about it. It's a book about a teacher. Basically, it's just about a teacher named Miss Jean Brodie, and Miss Jean Brodie has sort of a cult of pupils, and she's like, this book is set in, I want to say, Ireland or Scotland in the 1920s and 30s, and it's about her and her pupils and what happens to her pupils, and she's like this feminist, interesting teacher who doesn't follow what all the other teachers like do and teach, and her pupils are kind of their own weird little set of kids who have a very different perspective because of Miss Jean Brodie. This book is super weird. The writing is really beautiful, but it's also very odd. Like, Miss Jean Brodie, while being a feminist, is also a fascist. It's fascinating, and a book that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, and I think more people should talk about it because it's really interesting in its depiction of Miss Jean Brodie, a very complex, odd female character. Ooh, getting there. Next we have Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. I read this during Booktubeathon and I loved it so much. If you don't know who Shonda Rhimes is, she's a showrunner for shows like Grey's Anatomy and How to Get Away with Murder and Scandal. This book is about Shonda Rhimes' year of saying yes to everything that she can. It's an inspirational self-help book, but it's really more of a memoir about Shonda Rhimes. I found it incredibly inspiring. Shonda Rhimes has, again, a very unique perspective. She's arguably the most powerful woman in television, and she's also a black woman, and I loved her writing in this book. I loved how hopeful and kind and big and open-hearted it was. It allowed myself to read a different perspective, and it also allowed me to feel inspired by her own perspective, but inspired also by this idea of saying yes and being open-minded about things and being open-minded about opportunities. And after reading this, I've actually been more of a yes person, not in the Jim Carrey way, but in the Shonda Rhimes way, and I just loved it, and more people should also read this book. Alright, getting down to the last two books. The next book I read is Every Heart is a Doorway, by Seanan McGuire. I feel like I'm gonna say that wrong. Sinead? Okay, I'm not gonna try. I should have looked it up. Everyone has read this book except for me. I checked it out from the library. Every Heart is a Doorway is sort of a experimental, not really experimental, it's a fantasy novel about a world, or about a universe where Narnia and all of these, not Narnia specifically, but those kind of doorway worlds exist, where you go through the cupboard or go to this magical door that appears and you end up in another world. But there's lots of worlds, there's arguably infinite worlds, and it's about what happens when those kids that have, fallen into those worlds come back and they can't go back to those worlds, and they're in their, they're here on Earth in the regular worlds, and how they cope. There's lots of great representation, queer representation especially, and I really enjoyed it. I don't think I liked it as much as other people, but in general I really liked it. I thought it was too short for me to really get into it, and I know there's sequels, which I definitely want to read, but I liked the writing style, and I loved the concept, and I thought overall it was done fairly well and very well at times. It reminded me a little bit of The Magicians in a way that I was all about, kind of that dark side of the fantasy world. Anyway, I really liked it, I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to reading other books. Last book I want to talk about has to do with the Girl Sex 101 book club that is still happening. We took a little bit of a break. This is a book club that I run with Emma from Drinking by My Shelf, and now Joss from Squibbles Reads, who has joined our book club, which we're so elated about. Last month we read, or the last couple months we read How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran. And I have very mixed feelings about this book. So this book club, we talk about sex, sexuality, gender, in terms of specifically main characters who are identifying as a woman. And this book is about a teenage girl who's living in England in the early 1990s, and she comes from a poor family, a poorer background, and she gets into rock journalism and rock criticism and gets involved with sex and drugs and everything else in between. I really like this book for the most part. I didn't love it. I thought the pacing was really weird. I didn't always agree with how Caitlin Moran presented things. As Emma pointed out to me, at times it feels like Caitlin Moran was just kind of inserting things that, like, feminist things that she wanted to put in there, but they didn't actually make sense for this teenage girl to be thinking them all the time. But I enjoyed it for the most part, and I liked the depiction of sex, especially in this book, because it felt very realistic. The main character is very, she's very nervous about sex at first, but she's very excited about the idea of having sex, and I liked that it showed this voracious, female teenage girl who, like, really is into this idea of having sex, and she's not beholden by anything. Like, that's what she wants to do, and she's very about it, and I think that's cool, to have that sort of representation of a sex positive teenage girl. What else I liked about this book is how she talks about dealing with men specifically, and the sex with men, and how she at first feels like she has to do things because they want them to, or she has to do them because if she doesn't, she's not going to be like this feminist, sex positive, cool girl, and how she kind of grows out of that and learns that that's not true. She should do what she wants to do, and I liked that as well. In general, I enjoyed this book, and I thought it was a fairly good representation of a sex-positive female teenage girl. I didn't love the book completely, but I liked that element the most. So yeah, moving on though, the book we're going to read next month is Far From You by, I believe, Tessa Sharp. I could be wrong. I think it's Far From You by Tessa Sharp. I probably should have looked. But Far From You has bisexual representation, and Emma and I are both bisexual, so it's very exciting, and we're very excited about it, and we're probably going to start in the next week or so. I will update the description below when I find out for sure when we're starting that. But go look at Emma and Joss's video to see what they think or their thoughts and all of that. I'm very excited. I went to BookNet Fest and it was just the best thing ever, and I filmed a video with Mike from Slice of Mike, so that's gonna come up soon. It's kind of a crappy video, but in my brand crappy video. Anyway though, I hope you enjoyed this long, rambly, dumpster fire, info dump video. I hope you guys have a lovely day.